Welcome back. We have an author joining us on the show today. His name is Stephen Hunter. He's from the Caribou, and he has written 2 books. The first of which is called The Cameron Ridge Conspiracy. There they are on the screen. And the second one called Strings. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, you have made the trek today from Big Lake Ranch, where you've lived for the last 5 years.
I've lived there for 25 years.
25 years.
Yes, it's just a bit northeast of Williams Lake on the road to Likely.
Fantastic. And it sounds like where you live has a bit of a theme in your first book.
People have been telling me that for both books. A lot of the natural images are from my own experience living in the Caribou.
And you live right along the Gold Rush Trail, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
So this first book, again, The Cameron Ridge Conspiracy, can you give us sort of a synopsis about it?
The Cameron Ridge Conspiracy is fiction set in the Caribou Gold Rush. So it's a story told by a young Secwepemc First Nation woman who looks back 10 years and tells the tale of losing her brother and sister in a tragedy on the trail at the hands of 3 miners. So the story follows her and her parents and her village over the course of a year, 1859, 1860, as her family seeks justice in the midst of the chaos of the gold rush and the early efforts of the British Crown to colonize British Columbia.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. So that's your first book. And then your second book is called Strings. And this is about a musical composer who sort of takes a change in the way what he does.
Yes, it's a fellow who leaves his career behind to pursue his passion for music. And unfortunately, he finds that he develops a kind of a composer's writer's block. And so off he goes to work with an old friend in San Francisco who is an expert at the identification of rare and valuable instruments in the violin family. And while there, he winds up in the midst of an international ring of crooks in the violin trade.
And he has to try and get out of it.
And he has to figure out. It's a story of an ordinary man faced with extraordinary circumstances and how he handles it.
Are you a guitar player?
Yes.
So does that tie into it at all? Sort of from drawing from your own experience as a musician, or?
Where this second book, Strings, came from, my parents were both professional classical musicians. My father was a cellist. And sadly, a few years ago, he sank far into the murk of dementia and couldn't play anymore. So I was tasked with the sale of his cello that he had since 1964. And the cello had a label on it, but it had no paperwork, no certificate of authentication. It's only one of these rare experts in the trade that can truly identify an instrument like my father's. And so the first thing that turned out was that the label on the inside of the back of the cello was phony. It was forged and stuck on there. It said Matteo Goffriller 1742. And if it had been that, it would have been worth a pile of money. So eventually, the cello made its way to Boston to one of these experts, and he certified it as being a Fiorini, Matteo Fiorini, 1870, Italian. And so that whole business of the fraud in the violin trade really intrigued me, and I thought I would apply myself to a story.
So your dad went through his life with this cello thinking it was a type of cello from a certain age, and it was not. Is that correct?
You know, I don't recall, because it was 50 years ago, that what he really thought that cello was.
But you took the knowledge that you learned from this experience and incorporated some of it into this book.
And I did a lot of research around the violin fraud specifically.
Very interesting. And then the first book, of course, as we could go back to it, speaking about a girl who had her 2 siblings killed by miners. You have worked as a social worker helping Aboriginal people in their communities. So some of your experience from that would be tied into this as well?
Yeah, I worked for the Ministry of Children and Family Services, or its derivatives, for over 30 years, and all of that time I worked with First Nations and Métis people in BC, all over the province. And when I left that behind, I wanted to write about some of my experience, and it occurred to me how overwhelming it must have been during the gold rush to have thousands and thousands of people entering a First Nations territory and overrunning it, and at the same time having the British Crown trying to control things to get to have access to the resources of the Aboriginal people's lands. And so,
two very interesting but different topics, both in these books, and I think definitely worth a read. I'm really glad you could be here today. But I also wanted to mention that you also write a humorous short fiction column for the BC Outdoors magazine. Is that right?
Yeah, I kind of fell into that a few years ago now, and I write the Last Light column at the back of the magazine, which is a funny story about stuff that happens in the bush.
Right. So. Very cool. So people can find you by going to stephenhunter.ca and reading some of your work there. And they can meet you if they would like by coming to Chapters tomorrow at 1 in the afternoon. You're having a book signing for most of the afternoon. Is that right?
That's right.
Fantastic. Well, enjoy your stay. I know you're here to see some grandchildren, so I hope you have a great weekend. And thanks for being here with us today. If you would like to meet Stephen Hunter, you can certainly do that. As I mentioned, he will be at Chapters tomorrow at 1 o'clock in Kamloops with his books. We're back in 90 seconds. Stay with us.